Now, level design is definitely important in any kind of game, whether it's action, whether it's stealth, whether it's puzzle, but I would argue that the most important type of game in regards to needing top-notch level design to be good would probably be horror games. Because think about it, in a game like Devil May Cry 5, if all of the arenas just tend to be bland kind of circles that don't get in the way of the camera, you don't really care, because all you're doing is fighting those enemies and the gameplay and your enjoyment of it is based in that combat. However, horror games are based on exploration, pacing, item management, enemy placement, and if you fuck up the level design on this, you could take a good game in theory and make it a shit game. So today I'm Pliskin, and we're going to be talking about different horror games, how they use good level design to make sure the horror experience is fun, and bad level design to show how horror without good pacing is just uncomfortable and not enjoyable. So let's start this off with my favorite and most replayed horror game, Haunting Ground. I think Haunting Ground has both examples of top tier horror level design and terrible horror level design. But first let's talk about the good. Belly Castle is the first area in the game that you as Fiona get to go around and explore. The start of it is very linear and guided, introducing the enemies, gameplay mechanics, so on and so forth. However, everything is paced so briskly and so naturally that when you're going through these hallways and stumbling across mandatory or optional cutscenes, it never feels out of place or it's taking you out of the experience. It all feels part of a nice flow. And on the note of optional cutscenes, this area probably has the most. The most secrets, the most ways of dealing with your pursuer in unique ways, and the most kind of like fail state / success state cutscenes. It's pretty cool, because every time you go through this area, it feels fresh as you might discover new cutscenes, or you might skip over cutscenes and get something alternative. It's also really well paced because the puzzles here are all naturally connected. It's very easy to find your way around. Like there's a lot of rooms, there's locked doors, there's all this kind of stuff that could be made to be really unfun. However, because every room and every locked door has a purpose, whether it's something you need to come back to later on, or whether it's kind of like a connecting sort of hub between different spaces, a middle zone that you know is safe, or just areas that contain puzzle or key items, everything matters here. And when you revisit these areas, you know exactly where they are in relation to everything else you're doing. It's very hard to get lost. If you start a game of Haunting Ground and you're in Belly Castle and you save and then you come back to it a month later, odds are it'll only take you like 5 to 10 minutes tops to figure your way around. So everything is connected in a way that's easy to memorize because every room, every door, every thing you interact with has a purpose and has some kind of character to it. And the optional cutscenes kind of give more fluff to make sure every little nook and cranny of this area, whether for scares, whether for discovery, whether for items that are going to help you out in New Game Plus, is memorable. There's not one room or one area here that I would call bland or forgettable, and this is really hard to achieve. And normally it would have to be an incredibly small space, but Belly Castle is actually pretty big. I mean, it's a castle with multiple floors, multiple areas, outdoors and indoors, so the fact that the devs were able to pull this off on a large scale like this is pretty freaking cool. And because it's so well designed, you want to keep exploring and find secrets. Because even though you're scared and wondering where the pursuer is, the design of the level is so intriguing that you want to explore this mysterious world that Fiona has caught herself up in. I can't say the same for the water tower though. The same way that Belly Castle uses some linear sections towards the beginning to ease you into the world, the Water Tower is linear in all the worst ways. Now, I've talked before about how its enemy design is terrible, so I won't talk too much about the enemies, but I am going to talk about their placement. But first, the Water Tower is essentially just a basement dungeon, a front door that leads to a bridge that you can't cross yet, and then a spiraling staircase that goes up that has a bunch of winches and levers that switch things back and forth, and you need to manipulate them to progress until you get to the puzzle on top. Now, a linear, straightforward area isn't bad. I mean, this can be used in a lot of ways for reflection, like in Snake Eater with the ladder. You know, just a space where you kind of stop, you pump the brakes, and you think about everything that you've gone through. Haunting Grounds doesn't do that. It has these really gimmicky sections where an invisible enemy starts chasing you, annoying music starts playing, and it's not like Belly Castle where I could be like, oh, I know this one room that's probably going to be really good to lose this guy in. No, you just have to run back down the spiral staircase until it loads that next area in, and then the enemy despawns. Then you immediately go back to where they were and they weren't there. So the enemy just randomly comes in to force you to have to walk back down the stairs. This is annoying, this is repetitive, and this is terrible level design. And Haunting Ground pushes it even further where it's not like, oh, now I'm scared and I'm not having fun. It gets to the point where it's so boring and repetitive that I'm not even scared anymore, I'm just frustrated. This is perhaps one of the worst designed levels in any game, period, never mind horror games. To make things worse, at the very top you have a series of smaller enemies that, if spaced out, can make for interesting challenges, but there's just a whole bunch of them down an area that you need to be funneled through. So if you're not careful with how you handle this, or if you're being chased, it's almost a guaranteed game over. But now let's get back to talking about some good horror level design. And for this, I want to go to Resident Evil 7. You could pick any Resident Evil game, as the majority of them have really well designed levels, to the point where I'd call them probably the industry standard for how to make a good horror game level. Resident Evil 7, the reason I'm going to bring it up is because I want to talk about the old house. Now, the old house, just like the original Baker Mansion, is really fun to explore, easy to get to know, the map is incredibly intuitive, and like Belly Castle, almost every room serves a unique purpose, has an item of interest, a puzzle thing, a scare, whatever, right? Now, not only do you get to glimpse this area ahead of time, almost like you're scouting ahead with the cassette tape that you can watch, but while you're in this area, a new enemy gets introduced, the bug-type enemies. Now, with these bug-type enemies, you soon realize that their nests and the enemies themselves can't really efficiently be dealt with. That is, until you put together a flamethrower. Now, the burner in Resident Evil 7 fits really nicely into the single-purpose design, in the sense that it is uniquely adept at taking care of these nests and these bugs. Now, at this point, you might be thinking, Pliskin, trust me, it's relevant to the level design. The reason I'm bringing this up is because the sandbox itself with the burner interacts with the level design because those bug-type enemies have nests throughout the level that make certain rooms inaccessible, certain items inaccessible, certain doors inaccessible. So not only is this burner an amazing sandbox tool to deal with enemies, but it also interacts with the level itself. They all coexist so beautifully. And for sandbox elements to be so intrinsic to the experience and so well balanced to the point where they tie directly in with the level design, like, come on, you know I'm gonna love that. But yeah, even Resident Evil games that don't do horror primarily have really well-paced horror sections. The best example is the Beneviento house in the action-oriented Resident Evil 8. Now, you know what other game does this really well? Dead Space 2. Now, I'm sure there's a lot of levels and segments that we could talk about here, and I'm sure there's some of you that might be like, oh, isn't that more of an action game? And no, it's definitely a horror game still. It has a lot of action elements, but it doesn't go full Resident Evil 8 to where it starts feeling more like survival action rather than survival horror. Dead Space 2 is scary, and the stalker type enemy is the perfect example of this. Now, again, like Resident Evil 7, there's an enemy, there's an arena, and there is a weapon that all tie into each other. When you come across these stalker type enemies, they can kill you very fast, they charge you down, and it's very hard to keep track of them. So to make sure that the experiences are fair, all the times where you come across them, you're in a room that has a bunch of different boxes, pillars, columns, all in different rows to create a maze-like structure. So these things can charge you if they get a clear sight of you, yet there's enough corners where you can reorientate yourself and organize yourself. Now, the sandbox weapon that comes into play here is the detonator, which allows you to put down these mines that section off certain parts of the maze, so you can take control of the environment through this weapon to take care of this really difficult enemy. So again, the level design here caters directly into the gameplay experience with the enemies and the weapon sandbox, and like Resident Evil 7, that is just freaking amazing, and I cream my pants every time I play through these sections. Now, you remember how I was talking about the water tower and how terrible it was? At least it was short. Imagine an area designed so poorly that it makes the game more so frustrating than fun, and imagine that being almost the entire game. Well, you don't have to imagine it, because there's a series called Silent Hill that almost exclusively does this.
Forget it. This is way too gross. Who would even think of doing something so disgusting?
Of course, there are some exceptions. The beginning of the mall in Silent Hill 3, the Blue Creek and Woodside Apartments in Silent Hill 2 tend to be fairly well-paced experiences. However, everyone, no matter what Silent Hill you're playing, has probably come across a point where they just feel so confused, so lost, and so annoyed because there's so many locked doors and rooms that don't serve any purposes. Rooms that punish you by going in there because there's a whole bunch of enemies and you might expend resources, but there's no reward. And it's not like it's just a one gimmick thing to keep you on your toes, it's like the entire level. Brookhaven Hospital in Silent Hill 3 specifically was fucking torture to get through. And now, before you start telling me that that was on purpose, I mean, like, okay, yeah, the developers could make an area that's supposed to be uncomfortable. It's a horror game and that could add to the horror. I get that, but it doesn't mean you need to use bad level design. Take Signalis, for example. Signalis's hallways are fucking terrifying. It's a chore to go through them. However, the sense of progression is always there. Doors are clearly color-coded as to whether or not there's something of value or if I can just skip it. I don't have to try every single doorknob to see whether or not I need to go into this room or not. There's no room that serves no purpose. It either has a puzzle item, a weapon, some cutscene, some kind of character, or it's a transitionary space. In Silent Hill 3 and Brookhaven, there are literally some rooms that serve no purpose, so you're wandering around in the dark, you get inside there, and then you're like, okay, I guess I just wasted my fucking time. And when you feel like you're wasting your time, and the experience is a tortured experience, it's not fun. Signalis proves that you can do that tortured kind of horror, where playing the game feels extra stressful, because it's a horror game, without fucking up the level design like Silent Hill does. Signalis literally does everything Silent Hill tries to do, except it executes it well, by incorporating the map design and philosophies from Capcom games, and by just having a clearer sense of direction with the gameplay. The sandbox is better, the map design is better, and it has all the things you love about Silent Hill. I am not going to shut up about how much you should fucking play Signalis if you like horror, if you like Silent Hill, and in this case here, if you like good map design. At this point here, we've talked about good map design in horror games. We've talked about how bad map design can completely derail the entire game experience and make it a chore to play, but not in the good kind of scary chore to play kind of way. However, there is one horror experience that's level design is so perfectly tight that I put it above everything else. And that is the mission 343 Guilty Spark in Halo 1. You thought you were going to be able to get through this entire fucking video without me talking about Halo. Surely because it's a horror video, I'm not going to bring up Halo 1. Well, too bad, motherfucker. Here we go. Really quick note. If you haven't played through Halo 1, I want you to stop watching this right now. I'm going to end this video off talking about Halo 1. And if you haven't experienced this for yourself, this level is so good at delivering horror, you need to go out and experience it. Honestly, if you're still watching my videos after a while and you haven't played Halo 1, I am going to find you, I'm going to kidnap you, and I'm going to tie you to a chair and force you to play it. So, you've been warned. But yeah, don't spoil this for yourself. Go ahead and stop here. Here, I'll even do a little outro for you. So that's been talking about map design, yada yada yada. I've been Pliskin, over and out.
This is Solid Snake. Hey, subscribe to Pliskin Boy. God damn it. You heard him?
Okay, people that haven't played 343 Guilty Spark, you can go away now. Now, with 343 Guilty Spark, you've spent the entire game slowly mastering the weapon sandbox of Halo 1, the enemy sandbox, understanding the combination of weapons, visual cues, audio cues. You've gotten to know how to fight the Covenant, and at this point here, you know exactly what you're doing. You feel in control. 343 Guilty Spark doesn't start that way. You instead get this ominous cut of a dank, dingy swamp, and you see the Covenant running away from something. Now, up until this point, the Covenant has been shown as an unstoppable force that's decimating humanity. Now, you've seen them run away before, but that's usually when you're there. You're the biggest dick in the game, so when you're not there and you see these guys running away, it's really ominous, because you're thinking, okay, have the Marines just really stepped up their game, or what? You land in the forest and you get this beautiful fucking soundscape. You can go by all these crashed ships, both human and Covenant, and see wreckages all around. You see ominous figures moving in the mist that show up as allies sometimes and then show up as enemies sometimes. You come across Covenant remnants, and as you fight your way through them, you start to realize, hey, these guys, it's just grunts and jackals. It's not any of the elites or hunters or harder enemies, so what's going on here? After going through this dimly lit swamp, climbing over all these tree trunks and all this, you're guided to the entrance of a Forerunner facility that goes underground. You see human gunfire coming out from it and enemies running away, but when you go in there, there's no humans. So you walk into this ominously large corridor, the same kind of brutalist, minimalist structures that you're used to with Forerunners by now, but it somehow feels emptier. It somehow feels lonelier. You take an elevator that takes you deep down underground, and you slowly fight your way through different Covenant patrols in all these different rooms and arenas that just feel way too sparsely populated. The last mission you were playing had extensive open battlefields, so to go from that, you know the game can handle having tons of enemies on the screen at once, but now it's like there's never enough, and you can't shake the feeling that something is off. If you explore the environment, you see this weird substance oozing from different surfaces. You'll enter certain areas and all the enemies have already been dead, in a way that's extremely brutal because their brightly colored blood just coats different hallways. Something feels off. You keep going deeper and deeper, and eventually you come across a Marine. Maybe this was the guy that was shooting the enemies on the outside. But he's not acting like normal Marines. He's freaking out, and he's trying to shoot you. Now, usually as the player, you either kill him or move on, depending on your moral compass, but at this point here, you're like, okay, the game has never done that. Then you look around the wreckage in the room where he's in, and there's no clear hallways where you have to progress. You instead have to almost platform over wreckages, something that's incredibly irregular for Halo and its level design. You keep moving forward until eventually you come across this one room, and this cutscene starts to play.
Why do we always have to listen to this old stuff, Sarge?
Watch your mouth, son. This stuff is your history. It should remind you grunts what we're fighting to protect. Stay close, Jenkins.
Look at it. Something scrambled the insides.
Right, well, let's get this door open.
I'll try, sir. But it looks like these Covenant worked pretty hard to lock it down.
Just do it, son.
Yes, sir. I don't... There! Mira!
Hold still! Hold still! Let him have it! Sergeant, we're surrounded. God damn it, Jenkins! Fire your weapon!
There are too many,
Don't
Sarge!
even think about it, Marine.
Now, this is probably peak horror level design right here. After you see this cutscene and you realize something else is here with you in this big vacant room, the enemy doesn't start flooding in right away. You're given a moment with the music, with your surroundings, with the blood piles on the floor, with the weapons scattered about before the enemies come in. So you get this moment where you just reflect on all the environments you've seen, the cutscene you just watched, all the blood and wreckage suddenly starts making sense, and then bang, you have to go through all these areas again, fighting this new enemy that does not play by the rules you have become so accustomed to. You start seeing how these arenas are designed in a way that suits these enemies that can leap from one floor to the next, something that the Covenant just cannot do. Suddenly the verticality starts clicking in, and just how the burner and the detonator worked for certain areas in Resident Evil 7 and Dead Space 2, the shotgun that you find works for all of those tight, close-knit hallways that you were filtering yourself through before. Now, I can't stress just how important the discovery of this shotgun and the overall mission experience was to me growing up. This became kind of like my teddy bear, and I definitely believe this was the moment where I started getting my love for shotguns. Because you feel so unsafe, you feel so lonely, you feel so out of your element, and when you find this, you feel like, okay, this is the tool that's gonna get me out alive. But while the sandbox tends to ease up on the horror, the map design doesn't. You remember that elevator you took to get down here? You try calling it and it comes crashing down in flames. All of a sudden you're panicking because the route that you memorized on your way here is gone. So you wander through all these rooms that are no longer vacant. You miss the vacant, creepy atmosphere because now it's just full of all these strange enemies. Eventually you find another elevator, but it takes you deeper down into the facility. And there's blood all over the walls, so this moment causes even more panic because here you are. You find an elevator, you're like, finally I can get out of here, and it just drags you deeper in. Eventually you fight your way through that area and you get to the top, and then the game continues on, but just this sense of dread that evolves to terror, that evolves into panic, is amazing horror level design. And Halo 1 deserves all the props in the world for this mission. There's a reason why people who play Halo 1 say this is their favorite mission. And as a kid, playing this when I was about, I've been playing Halo 1 since I was 3, but I played through the game properly when I was around 12 to 14-ish. And not knowing about the Flood, because I'd only really played Halo 1 and Halo Reach at that point, I was freaked the fuck out. This game caught me completely off guard, and that stuck with me forever, as one of the scariest moments I've had playing a game. But yeah, I think I'll wrap things up here now for real. What's your favorite horror game in relation to pacing and level design? Can you think of another genre that's so intrinsically tied, so dependent on good level design? If you can, leave it down in the comments below. Or generally just tell me about some shit in video games that scared you as a kid. Even if it's stuff that's not scary now, I've always been genuinely curious about that. And if you're curious in hearing about shit that I found scary, go ahead and let me know. I have a couple of videos down the runner, but we'll touch on more horror type content later on. Maybe I'll save that for Halloween, but still. I want to hear your shit down in the comments. This has been Pliskin Boy, over and out.
This is Solid Snake. Hey, subscribe to Pliskin Boy. God damn it.
You heard him.